Вітаю, друзі! Наш брифінг присвячений викриттю брехні і пропаганди держави-агресора.
Greetings, friends. Our briefing is dedicated to exposing the lies and propaganda of the aggressor state. Let's start with how Russia explained its failure in the Kharkiv direction. You know that through its Ministry of Defense, the aggressor state announced that it turns out that this is not an offensive of the Ukrainian army, but, as they said, a regrouping of Russian troops, which was apparently done with the aim of increasing efforts in the direction of the Donetsk region. At the same time, the Russian Ministry of Defense lied to its own citizens, claiming that the Ukrainian Armed Forces suffered incredible losses during the offensive and talked about the alleged destruction of more than 2,000 Ukrainian foreign fighters liquidation of more than 2,000 Ukrainian foreign fighters, the Ministry of Defense of Russia reports. This is a lie. Of course, this kind of operation will not be without casualties on the part of the armed forces of Ukraine, but they are tens to hundreds of times smaller. In particular, I personally communicated with the command of one of our heroic brigades, which was carrying out a counter-offensive in the direction of Kharkiv. The number of casualties that unfortunately took place is about 30 people, but by no means the 2,000 claimed by the Ministry of Defense of Russia. In the other brigade that also participated in the counter-offensive, the number of casualties was 15 people. That is, through such disinformation, Russia is trying to justify its own failure, and to do it both in front of its own political leadership and in front of its citizens, who for the past 6 months have heard propaganda about a successful offensive by the Ministry of Defense of Russia on Ukrainian occupied territories. Of course, the human casualties suffered by the Ukrainian armed forces are a tragedy, but at the same time the territory liberated by the Ukrainian army is unprecedentedly large, and it does not bear any comparison with the offensive that the Russian army is trying to carry out in the direction of the Donetsk region. Meanwhile, the Russian propagandists themselves got confused and simultaneously issued two versions at the same time. They talk about the fact that the counter-offensive forces are not Ukrainian armed forces, but foreign mercenaries. At the same time, they talk about the fact that the Ukrainian army, they already admitted in this message, is powerful and capable of teaching others how to properly fight Russia. Just listen to the quotes. Telegram channel of Solovyov rebroadcasts Telegram channel of Yegor Gonza, the other propagandist. Judging by the radio interceptions and data obtained after talking to the prisoners, at least several groups of officers consisting of NATO instructors, Poles and Englishmen are stationed near Sovyansk, the Ministry of Defense of Russia reports. At the same time, in another propagandist Telegram channel, they admit that the Ukrainians themselves are resisting the aggressor. The same Solovyov quotes the channel of the Russian military propagandist Alexander Kots. Talked with the guys of the Liman direction. Of course, they get it. Of course, they get harsh time, but they hold on. The enemy, that is the Ukrainian armed forces, has a brutal system of counter-battery warfare. Also, Russian propagandists are beginning to recognize the achievements of the Ukrainian armed forces. The same Telegram channel of Solovyov quotes another propagandist in his Telegram channel. I quote, "Ukrainians themselves can teach to fight anyone." At the same time, in order to justify their failures, propagandists of the Russian armed forces begin to invent historical parallels. In this way, in order to minimize their own defeat, they say, all this already happened 100 years ago, and it was called the Great Retreat of 1915. Kots quotes the Russian propagandist Andriy Medvedev. At the same time, among the propagandists of the Russian army, dissatisfaction with their own generals is growing. Some of them call for the execution of the high military command. Quoting Solovyov, "I am not excusing anyone, and even more so, I am not arguing with the fact that many commanders in uniforms deserve to be dismissed with dishonor, and some of them deserve a criminal sentence and even execution. And I can even name the people who make the decisions by their last names." The titled propagandist of Russian armed aggression, Margarita Simonyan, is also wondering. Now in the patriotic camp is another round of complex, painful disputes and discussions. And one and the same question comes to mind. Do we need to explain to the top, to the Russian political leadership, the sins that are visible here, below, on the ground? That is, the Russian propagandists admit that the military leadership completely failed to implement the plans of aggression in 3 days. But they are also failing to conquer the territory of the Donetsk region by mid-September, as they promised recently, and they bear huge losses both in manpower and in those territories that are being recaptured by the Ukrainian Armed Forces. At the same time, Russians continue to lie about the apparently large losses suffered by the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Just think about what they claim. I am quoting the Telegram channel of the Russian state television, Russia Today, reporter Andrei Rudenko. The losses of the Ukrainian army are huge. In the first week of the adventure, they lost more than 10,000 killed. That is, if at the beginning of the counteroffensive they said about 2,000, now they are already 10,000. Complete delusion that is not based on objective data from the battlefield. In particular, the Ministry of Defense of Russia once again lies about the fact that, as a result of a high-precision strike, serious losses were inflicted on Ukrainian brigades. Well, firstly, these strikes are not highly accurate, and the civilian infrastructure suffers. And secondly, the number of victims is overestimated by tens or even hundreds of times. This is what the Ministry of Defense of Russia claims, that the temporary deployment points of the 95th Airborne Assault Brigade in the areas of Slovyansk and Konstantinovka were hit, hundreds of dead. I asked directly the military command of the 95th Brigade. This information is a lie. In order to at least somehow justify their own failure in the Kharkiv direction, Russian military propagandists invent legends about supposed heroes. One of them has a cosign or a surname Buba. Only listen to the story published by the Russian official military media. The hero of the defense of Izum, Buba, took command of the battle during the enemy's tank breakthrough near Izum. Thanks to his actions, the attack was foiled. Buba, with broken legs, covered the retreat of his comrades, and in order not to be captured, he blew himself up with a grenade. These and other legends spread by propagandists are only intended to remove accusations against the Russian military that they failed to counter the offensive of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Well, in order to at least somehow justify their reputation in the eyes of the international public, Russia resorts to services of discredited international speakers. Thus, a Finnish speaker appeared on Solovyov's broadcast. His name is Johan Beckman, nicknamed Word, in the Finnish social media. If you read his biography, it turns out that he has a criminal past. A criminal case was opened against him. He was accused by the court of Helsinki and sentenced to 1 year of imprisonment for the crimes he committed. This is not the first time that Russia has resorted to speakers with a criminal past. Remember the Russian propagandist with an American surname, Scott Ritter, who has a conviction for sexual crimes against minors. Let me end the briefing with a traditional appeal not to believe the lies and propaganda of the aggressor state, to trust only verified sources of information and to trust the Ukrainian national teleson and the Ukrainian military and political leadership. See you.